Hi there, my name is Oliver. Tonight I will be reading chapters 5 and 6 of The Sword and the Chain, second novel of the trilogy Guardians of the Flame, The Warriors. In these chapters, we rejoin the party just after Karl, Walter, and their newly freed ally Chuck have assaulted a party of slavers outside the city of Betrayal. Karl seems to have a plan for them all to survive the results of revealing their presence to the Slavers Guild. It remains to be seen if his plan will work. Let's get into it. Chapter 5. The War Begins. If ever there could be a proper time for mere catch arguments, that time surely is not now. In times like the present, men should utter nothing for which they would not willingly be responsible through time and in eternity. Abraham Lincoln. Ahira sighed, shaking his head.
I should have known better,
he thought.
I really should have.
Correct.
Thank you, Elegon,
the dwarf spat.
Thank you very much. Any sign of trouble on the waist?
I would have mentioned it if there were.
Is there any sign of trouble on the waist?
No, there is nothing visible on the waist.
Good. Stay on watch.
The dragon didn't answer. Ahira decided to take that as an assent. Karl?
Yes?
The big man turned from his conversation with Andrea and the grimy little girl.
We need to talk.
Take a walk with me.
Sure. Give me a minute.
Karl patted Andrea on the arm and smiled down at the silent little girl, who clung to Andrea's arm as though it were a lifeline.
See if she'll let you give her a sponge bath, and dig up something else for her to wear.
He switched to English.
Push for the bath, he said in a low voice, and give her as thorough a going over as you can. She's been through a rough time, and we'd better know if there's anything physically wrong with her.
Andrea pulled the girl closer.
Why not just give her more healing drafts? We've still got some left from what you found in the slaver's wagon, no?
Only 3 bottles. I don't know how long they'll have to last. We can't afford to dispense the stuff when it isn't necessary. Just as a precaution.
And if she does need some?
Ahira grunted. Then we give to her. Karl, I do want a word with you. Now. One more thing.
Karl switched back to Arendra and raised his head.
Chuck, keep an eye on the bowman. It won't be for much longer.
Sitting across from the bound youth, Chuck nodded, then jerked his thumb at a large wooden trunk next to the boxy slave wagon. Yes, Karl, but do you mind if I go through this trunk while I do? I might find something. Maybe another bottle or 2 of the healing draughts. Maybe some more coin.
How do you plan on opening it?
Chuck smiled. I think I can find a key.
Go to it then.
Across the clearing, 5 other former slaves sat talking with Walter and Ricchetti. 3 men, 2 women, all of them filthy, although none were apparently injured. Despite his protestations, Karl had been generous with the bottles of healing draughts he had found in the slaver's wagon. There wouldn't be more of that coming their way, at least not from the Healing Hand Society. The Hand Acolyte had been more than clear on that point.
Well?
Karl raised an eyebrow.
What is it?
I sent you into Betrayal to pick up provisions and supplies. Not 7 more mouths to feed. He shrugged, his shoulders threatening to split the seams of his worn leather jerkin.
I would have brought back all of them, if most hadn't wanted to.
Crunch! Ahira snatched his battle axe from his chest, tearing the handle right through the straps that bound it to him. A thumb flick sent its leather sheath spinning away. Cullinane drew his sword and spun around in a crouch.
What the?
Sorry, Jack called out as he stood over the shattered trunk. He hefted the sledge. But I told you I'd find a key. Ahira looked down at the torn leather thongs that had secured his battle axe to his chest.
Nice friend you've got there, Karl.
He chuckled.
Take it easy, Ahira. You're all tensed up.
Ahira stared pointedly at Karl's naked blade.
And, of course, you're not. Well, He slipped the saber back into its scabbard. Never mind. Ahira raised a palm. Never mind. What is this insane plan of yours? Karl shook his head. In a while. First, how's Doria doing? Ahira spat. They wouldn't let me see her. The acolyte I spoke to said that she's being fully integrated into the body of the society, and that any contact with outsiders, was forbidden.
Be well, Doria. May you find with the hand all that eluded you with us.
You think she's okay? Hope so. If she isn't, there's not a damn thing we can do about it. Frustrating, but true. The matriarch of the Healing Hand Society had protected the Hand Preserve against the powers that had devastated the forest of Elrud, turning it into the waste. Handling a few warriors and a novice wizard wouldn't cause her to work up a sweat. Unless you feel like storming the tabernacle. Karl snorted. Fat chance. As to how I think we ought to proceed, how about you gather everyone around, while I have a talk with Andy, so that it... Karl Cullinane! Jack ran towards them, a long, thin piece of metal held high in his hands. Look! He jerked to a halt and handed it to Karl, holding it carefully as though it were a fragile piece of glass. Jack smiled broadly, as though he had just presented Karl with the Hope Diamond. Ahira looked at it. It looked like an oversized butter knife, actually. The flat blade was almost 3 feet long. He reached over and tested the edge against his thumb. Dull as a butter knife, too. What is this? Jack stood back. You don't know? That, Ahira, is a wood knife. Karl cocked his head to one side. I'm no wiser. What is a wood knife? Look. Jack lifted it from Karl's outstretched palms and walked to a nearby sapling. Holding the handle with just thumb and 2 fingers, he slashed at the trunk, as though in slow motion. The blade passed through the trunk as though it weren't there. With a rustling of leaves, the sapling crashed to the ground. See? Jack said, bouncing the blade off his own neck. It cuts only through wood, nothing else. Quite a find, eh? I expect we're going to find quite a bit of use for this where we're going. What the hell did that mean? Karl, would you please tell me what your... Cullinane raised a palm. Tell you what, why don't you gather everyone around, so I only have to go through this once. No rush. I've got to talk to Andy first, soon as she's finished bathing the girl. Private matter.
What's going on with the two of them now? I thought they'd worked things out.
Ahira opened his mouth, then closed it.
None of my business.
He nodded. Fair enough, but this had better be good. It will be, I hope. Karl led Andy well away from the camp, before sitting both of them down on a fallen log. How is she doing? Not too bad, at least physically. A few bruises, some abrasions were all I could find. But I'm not up on anatomy. It's too bad you can't check her over. She left the obvious unspoken. A little girl who'd gone through that particular kind of hell didn't need any man poking and prodding at her. He chuckled thinly. 2 weeks of pre-med doesn't make me an internist. If you can't find anything wrong with her, I probably couldn't. Well, just keep an eye on her. We can always dose her again later if she needs more. But that's not why I needed to talk with you. I wish I could put this off a bit longer, but... I've got a question for you. She smiled up at him. I can guess what it is. I've heard that fighting hikes up the old hormones, huh? Well... Hush. He shook his head. This is serious. I've got something to ask you, then something to tell you. And I hope I'm doing this in the right order. Her face matched his somber tone. Okay, Karl. You are serious. About something. He took a deep breath. The question is this. Will you marry me? Her eyes opened wide. Will I what? You heard me. All of a sudden, he didn't quite know what to do with his hands. They clutched aimlessly at the air in front of him. I know we don't have a priest around, but we could improvise some sort of ceremony. Marry me, you know, live together, have kids, the whole bit. She threw up her hands and laughed. Karl, just because we've slept together a couple of times. It's not that. Not just that, he amended silently.
If it's not that, then it has to be something else. Something that's pretty important. No. Andy paled. I'm pregnant? I must be, but how do you know?
Elegon. He can detect the pheromonal changes. But how did you guess?
It's the only thing that makes sense. We haven't discussed this before. She shook her head. Damn it, Karl, I'm not ready to be a mother, and... He raised a palm.
And we can take care of that, if necessary.
How?
Do I have to go into details? Just take my word, please. It can be done.
How?
He shrugged. This isn't exactly the way this was supposed to go, you know. Okay, think about it. We've got a lot of healing drafts, and I think I can improvise the tools for a D&C. I know I'm not a doctor, but we've got room for error. It'd hurt, but the drafts can protect you from any risk of infection, any permanent damage. If you want an abortion, you can have it. Up to you, he said, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. The thought of himself performing the abortion bothered Karl, not the notion of an early abortion itself. He'd never bought the idiotic notion that a microscopic blastula was a human being. Doing a primitive abortion here isn't the only choice. We could try to sneak you back home, through the gate, but I really don't want to try getting past the dragon again, and I'm sure as hell not going to suggest that. She tended her hands in front of her mouth and chewed on a forefinger. Let me think, okay? Fine. Take your time. Is there anything I can do?
Just leave me alone for a while.
Andy.
Please?
He stood. Okay, but I've got to go talk to everybody else. Hira's on my back. Join us in a few minutes?
Maybe. Just give me some time.
He nodded. I love you, you know.
I know, she smiled weakly. Now get lost for a while.
Please listen, Karl said in Narendra, as he stood in the center of the circle of faces. I've got something to say. He paused to look at them. With one exception, all of the former slaves still looked scared. The exception was Chuck. His smile almost radiated trust as he sat tailor fashion, his right hand never straying far from the hilt of his falchion. Lou Ricchetti's round face beamed up at him. Trust to Lou to work things out, if they involved numbers. And those economics courses he'd taken didn't hurt either. Ricchetti nodded reassuringly. Ahira scowled, as usual. He didn't like being kept in the dark. Probably he wouldn't like what came next any better. And then there was Slavatsky. Walter, if I can ever figure you out, I'll admit to being a genius.
Actually, Walter's easy. He's...
Hush. Karl went on. For those of you who don't know, there are people after my head. When I met Elegon, he was chained in a cesspit in Pandathaway. I didn't like that. I freed him. The Pandathaway Guilds didn't like that. They sent slavers out after me. After all of us. They caught up with us in the waste. We managed to get away and then kill all of the bastards. By now, Pandathaway probably thinks that I'm dead. The matriarch had said that he couldn't be located while on the Hand Preserve, and certainly a location spell couldn't have spotted him during the period that he'd been home, on the other side of the gate. They will soon be hearing that I'm alive. There's probably nothing we can do to prevent that. 20 yards behind Ahira, the bowman glared over at him. Even if we killed him, the other freed slaves will talk. I propose that we don't even try. Instead, I suggest that we do two things. First, Jock knows of an uninhabited valley in Thurange. I propose that we move there and settle down. Raise food and cattle, everything. We'll have to send another party into Matrail to pick up some more supplies and animals. Cattle, sheep, goats, chickens, whatever we need. The trip will take a while, and building houses, clearing fields, planting crops, all of it will be hard work. But once we're settled in... Walter shook his head. That won't do it. Pandathaway is ticked at you, Karl. They won't let a bit of distance stand between them and revenge. He shrugged. It might buy us some time, but that's all.
Notice the us?
Yes. Now hush. Karl held up a hand. No, I'm not going to spend much time there for the first couple of years. Certainly not enough to be located and found. Instead, Lou, explain a bit about supply and demand and how that affects economic utility.
Richetti picked up his cue as though they had rehearsed it, which they had, of course. He stood. The price of anything depends on two things: how much of it is available and how badly people want it. Supply and demand. If anything gets too expensive, then people start to find substitutes. That applies to swords, to grain, to cattle, and to slaves. Karl's talking about making slaves too expensive.
Exactly.
Karl folded his arms across his chest.
And we'll do that by making slave-taking too expensive, too risky a business. I'm talking about doing the same thing that we did yesterday, but on a larger scale. We'll hit every caravan we can, force the Slavers Guild to beef up their caravans, adding more and more guards, cutting down on the profits from slaving. And we'll keep doing that until the system starts to collapse.
Shaking his head, Ahira spat.
That's just plain silly. There are lots of slaves, Karl. You won't affect the price of slaves one whit. Figure that Pandathaway alone imports, say, 3,000-4,000 slaves per year. Right now, they get them via raids on Taranj, Melloway, and so forth. Let's say that each caravan has 20 slaves and that you hit and free one caravan each 10 day. And let's assume that every one of the freed slaves either joins us in this valley of yours or finds his or her way home. That's only 1,000 or so freed slaves each year. He shrugged. It'll drive the price up a bit, but that's all. Smiling broadly, Walter Slavatsky nodded. Beautiful, Karl. Damn it, James, you're wrong. It'll do more. Once we've demonstrated that we can take on slavers and get away with it, others will start doing it too. Everyone has shied away from crossing the Slavers Guild because of the fear of retribution. Once we show that we can get away with it, most of that fear will be gone. It's a sure bet that some of these unemployed mercenaries will try to get into the business. And since they'll have stolen the slaves, they'll be afraid to sell them. They'll have to free them, making their profit off money that the slavers carry, just as we did. He hefted his now full purse. A nice bit of thinking it through, Karl. This is what you're talking about, isn't it? Yes.
From across the clearing, Andy's voice called, "It's crazy, you know." She walked quickly toward the group.
How did she hear?
I echoed your words.
A mental smirk.
And if you're really nice to me, I won't relay your thoughts without permission.
I didn't know you could do that.
Although it really wasn't all that surprising, come to think of it.
You didn't ask.
He scowled.
Well, then, relay this.
He stopped himself. Never mind.
Andy.
Later. She smiled. We'll have plenty of time on this trip to that valley of yours. But we'd better move quickly. She placed the flat of her hand on her stomach. Before I start to swell. Karl couldn't help smiling.
Ahira shook his head. This is insane, you know, but...
But what? Richetti frowned. It makes perfect sense.
But let's try it.
The dwarf bounced to his feet and stuck out his hand at Karl.
You can count me in.
As they shook hands, Ahira shrugged.
It's worth a try.
He turned to the freed slaves.
You may either come with us or leave. Anyone who wishes to leave us should see me later.
Slavatsky smiled.
All we have to do is take on a few thousand slavers.
Andy shook her head. There's one other thing.
Oh?
Ahira cocked his head.
What am I missing?
We've also got to stay alive. Karl nodded.
That is the keystone of the whole plan, after all.
A gout of fire roared into the sky.
Nice keystone.
Elagon at his side, Karl smiled down at the bowman.
I'm going to turn you loose. We'll give you a water bag and a knife. Start across the waste tonight. I want the extra time to get clear of here.
As the youth glanced over at the string of horses, Karl shook his head.
If you try to leave before then, or raise a hand to any of us, or steal a horse, I'll have Elagon eat you.
The dragon leered.
Please try to leave early. I could use a snack.
The bowman glared up at Karl. The Pandathaway Guild's council will hunt you down like an animal. They will find you, Karl Cullinane, and, my Lord Mellon willing, I will travel to Pandathaway to watch you die.
Karl smiled. Have Lord Mellon give them a message from me. Tell them Karl Cullinane is alive, and...
He let his voice trail off. Did this make any sense? Here I am, an expectant father, and I'm asking for trouble. Ahira was right. This is absolutely insane.
You made a promise to the matriarch, and though she will not help you further, will you keep that promise or not?
Karl looked across the clearing to where the little girl was smiling at Andy over a bowl of stew. Not much of a smile, but a smile nonetheless, and a very special sort of smile. Yes. Hell yes. He cut the bowman loose.
Tell them this. I'm hunting them.
Part 2. The Valley. Chapter 6. Settling in. All things are artificial, for nature is the art of God. Sir Thomas Browne. The valley took Karl by surprise, although that morning Elegon had told him they would reach it shortly after noon. He led his mare up a gentle incline, through the charred remains of what had once been a stand of trees. There was no way of knowing what had caused the fire that had burned a black slash across the surrounding miles. Possibly someone's carelessness, possibly a lightning strike. The fire had been years before. Rain had since reduced the burned trees to a flat ash surface that allowed easy passage for both the flatbed and the former slave wagon. Life was starting to return. Impudently, thumb-thick saplings rose chest-high, as though in a promise that this area would be wooded once again. In the light breeze, leafy ferns nodded their agreement. In further confirmation, the grasses had started to reclaim the ground at the top of the hill. His horse snorted, nudging him from behind. "Damn it, Carrot, we're moving fast enough." He turned to stroke her neck before resuming their slow pace through the rubble.
You take it easy here. I don't want you breaking a leg.
She whinnied as if she understood, and agreed that breaking a leg was, indeed, not the ultimate goal of her horsey life. Would the healing draughts work on a horse? Possibly. Quite possibly. But would Ahira object to his experimenting, even if it meant the difference between preserving and having to kill the horse? Certainly. The dwarf and the horses had something less than a deep and abiding affection for each other. Behind him, Ahira grunted as he pulled on the reins of his gray gelding. "Move, you filthy little monster! Move, I said!" The small horse towered above the dwarf, drawing back its head to the limits of the reins, and snorting at Ahira as it gave ground, inch by inch.
Quite a horseman, eh?
The mental voice was faint. Quite. Following Ahira, Slavatsky sat in his usual place on the bench of the flatbed, with blonde Kira close beside him. A few weeks of freedom had done Kira's appearance good. She actually was quite pretty, although a bit too skinny for Karl's tastes. Deep in quiet conversation, Walter smiled and patted her knee. Karl found that vaguely reassuring, and was ashamed of himself for feeling that way. Walter's my friend, damn it. I should be happy he's found someone, not relieved that I don't have to worry about him and Andy anymore.
To the best of my knowledge, Walter has never been accused of practicing exclusivity.
Elegon.
If you're going to trust either or both of them, then do so. If not, don't. But whipping yourself with worry suggests that you don't think you have enough real problems to worry about. Would you like to hear my list?
No thanks, Elegon. I can always turn to you for a spot of reassurance, huh?
Think nothing of it.
I won't. Behind Slavatsky and Kira, Lou Ricchetti napped under a light blanket, with a sack of grain for his pillow. The wind carried his snores to Karl's ears. Humph. Ricchetti was supposed to be keeping an eye on the bull, who was secured to the flatbed by a length of rope tied to his brass nose ring. Karl thought about waking Ricchetti, then dismissed the idea. No need. The lumbering beast followed without complaint. From its high seat, Andy drove the former slave wagon. Little Aya huddled next to her. the 5 chicken cages tied down on the flat roof. The bars were gone from the wagon's windows, having joined the other rod stock in the back of the flatbed. Trotting along beside the wagon, the 2 goats voiced their unflattering opinion of the whole party. Aya turned to give them a few reassuring words. She liked the goats, although the smelly creatures didn't return her affection. Aya was still a problem. She had yet to make it through a night without waking up crying, not going back to sleep until Andy held her for at least an hour. What it came down to was simple. Aya was homesick. There was a solution to that, but Andy wasn't going to like it. She had practically adopted the girl. Spread out behind the wagon, Tennedy, Chatan, Eric, and Fialt led their horses, occasionally switching the 5 cows to make them keep the pace. The cattle were brakes on the whole procession. They could barely walk 15 miles on a good day. Goddamn splay-footed beasts.
Stop worrying. The trip is almost over.
Last was Chalk, who insisted on riding his horse through the charred rubble, swearing at her when she balked. Karl stroked Carrot's neck as they walked up the hill.
Easy now. A carrot works better than a stick most of the time.
This time, Elegon's voice was louder, clearer. Karl looked up. High overhead, the dragon circled, a dark speck against the blue sky. True, which is why I finally got around to naming my horse Carrot.
A suitable name. She is probably very tasty.
Elegon, you are not eating my horse. Case closed.
I would have thought I deserved some sort of reward for finding a route you can take your wagons over.
The mind link grew tighter for a moment, then loosened.
Lewis and Clark didn't have aerial reconnaissance. Neither did Cortez or Pizarro. You may have noticed that you haven't had to turn around and try a different route once over the past 3 months.
I noticed. Honest. And I noticed it the first day, even before you mentioned it. So would you please... He cut himself off. Snide comments were not the way to handle a child asking for praise. You've done one hell of a job, in case I haven't mentioned that recently.
You haven't?
The crest of the hill lay just a few yards ahead. The slope steepened. On an impulse, Karl dropped Carrot's reins and ran up, onto the summit and over the hill, and into wonder. The valley opened up below him. Trees and grasses spread out in a welcoming green embrace. In the distance, silvery threads of streams wove their way down from the far snow-peaked mountains, tumbling through stands of pine and maple, finally emptying into the mirror-bright lake that cupped the valley floor. Half a mile below, 7 deer drank at the lake's edge. The water was still, mirroring the fluffy clouds and blue sky. A 5-point buck looked up at him. Then the group sprinted gracefully into the forest, leaping high over the grasses as they ran. The wind blew across the valley, bathing him in the warm tang of sun-baked grasses and the cool scent of pines. He didn't notice Chak walking up. One moment, Karl was all alone. The next, the little man stood beside him, Carrot's reins in one hand, the reins of his own gray mare in the other. Like it? Chak smiled, handing him the reins. Karl didn't answer him. It wasn't necessary. Ready, Lou? Richetti nodded, smiling inside.
Ready? I've been waiting my whole life for a moment like this.
Ahira beckoned him to his feet. You go first. Richetti rose and walked to the campfire. He turned to face the others, his back to the crackling flame. The 2 main considerations in this sort of construction, he said, are water supply and defense. All the others looked at him, listening intently. Which was nice. Lou liked being the center of attention. For once. Slovatsky nodded. Good point, but what does that do for us? The fire was hot. Sweating, Richetti moved away from it, the heat still pressing against his back. Form follows function, Walter, he said. What we've got to do is figure out what sort of complex to make, given our present limitations of materials and the lack of power tools. I wish we had a few dozen tons of concrete mix, steel girders, PVC pipe, and such, but we don't. Both Chatan and Fialt frowned. while the other new people stared back blankly. Ricchetti realized that he had lapsed back into English.
Item, he thought. English, teaching of. Discussion. Many useful concepts are not available in Arendra, absent a great deal of neologism or circumlocution. Examples: concrete, suspension bridge, gunpowder, steam engine, railroad. Question: should we actually teach English, or settle for supplementing Arendra vocabulary?
Sprawled on the ground behind the others, Elegon raised his head.
Noted, Lewis. I will remind you of this later, when you have time to consider it.
Don't forget.
Dragons don't forget, stupid. We leave that sort of thing to humans.
My apologies, he said in Arendra, both to Elegon and to the natives. I was saying that we don't have many different materials to work with, nor do we have, magical tools, other than the wood knife. Chak spat. And you should be grateful for that, instead of complaining that we don't have any other magical tools. Wood knives are rare, Ricchetti. Takes a master wizard to make one, and it takes him years. I don't know where Ormust bought, or more likely stole, his. I've traveled far, only heard of a few in existence, only seen one other, in Cyforth, and that one heavily guarded. You couldn't have bought that knife for a wagon load of gold.
Cullinane raised a palm. Stand easy, Chuck. Lou was just commenting, not criticizing.
That seemed to settle the matter for the little man. Chuck listened to Karl the way Ricchetti would have listened to Washington Roebling himself. Ricchetti went on. How and what we build has to be planned with that limitation in mind. We also have to consider the problem of the water supply. Tennedy shrugged, sending her straight black hair flipping about her face. She was a slim woman, with an almost impossibly thin nose, and a permanent expression of distance on her drawn face. The daughter of a poor farmer on one of the shattered islands, on her 15th birthday, she had been sold to a slaver's ship. The 10 intervening years hadn't treated her kindly, as she passed from owner to owner. It showed in her lined face. Ricchetti found her profoundly unattractive, even when her mouth was closed, which was usually, but nevertheless all too seldom. What problem? She gestured at the lake, which lay shimmering in the starlight. If we build our houses close to the lake, then we have a short walk for water. If we are stupid enough to build them far away, then we have a long walk for water. What is so complicated about how far you have to carry a bucket? Sitting on the other side of Andrea from Little Ea, Cullinane shook his head, grinning.
I'd really like to have running water myself. Taste of home and all that. You've got a way?
Yup. Ricchetti smiled. I took a quick look this afternoon, while the rest of you were lolling around camp. So far, I've counted 7 streams that feed into the lake. I found one with a waterfall. He pointed, about a quarter mile that way. The waterfall's small. It's not much taller than Karl is. But if we set up the compound over part of that stream, surrounding the waterfall, we can divert it, and still have a bit of flow to play around with. We'll want a mill, for one thing. And in the future, I might be able to rig up some sort of water heater. Hot showers, Andrea said, sighing. She bent her head toward Ea. Have you ever had a hot shower? She shook her head. What's a shower, Andy? But in the short run, we can have flowing water inside for washing, cooking, and for privies. Ahira's forehead furrowed. How are you going to build a flush toilet? Ricchetti shrugged. That's years away. For now, you're going to have to settle for a constant flow one, sort of like an outhouse with some water from the stream running underneath. Open pipes like the Romans, but we'll use wood instead of lead. Slavatsky nodded his approval.
That's not bad. Constant flow toilet, huh? It's so simple it'd be hard to think up, if you didn't already know about it. I guess you weren't wasting your time in your engineering courses.
Cullinane threw back his head and laughed. The dwarf glared at him. What's so funny? The big man shook his head.
Never mind.
His expression went vague.
Lewis, Karl has asked me to tell you that he remembers lending you his copy of Ferdham's Freehold, and that he's glad he did.
That's nice.
And he also said to mention that he won't tell anyone that you swiped the notion of constant flow toilets from Heinlein, if you build the first one for him and Andrea.
Tell him to go to hell.
I'm running the construction here, and I'll do as I see fit.
He waited for Elagon to relay the message. Cullinane glared at him for a moment, then relaxed, his hand miming tipping a hat. Good. It was best to start things off by letting everyone, Cullinane particularly, know who was in charge of the building. In any case, he went on, that's the first part of it. The other thing is that the waterfall is in a stand of pines. We can save a lot of effort by building there. Even green, pine is good to build with. It's a bit tricky, but I've read about how to use it. I'd give any digit you care to name for 1/10 of the library Farnham had, or even for Robertson's Greenwood Construction, or the Britannica, or the Rubber Handbook, or anything. All that stood between him and all of those books was about 500 miles of forest, plains, mountains, and waste, plus the warrens surrounding the Gate Between Worlds, and the dragon guarding the gate. Elagon snorted.
You had best learn to live without those books, Lewis. He is still awake, and will be for much longer than you will live.
Richetti shuddered. No way was he ever going near the dragon again. So we build there, he said. Agreed?
Sounds right to me.
Cullinane nodded.
You were talking about defense. Some sort of castle?
No. We don't have the tools or the manpower for stonework, even if we could find stone worth quarrying. My suggestion is that we go for something like a western fort. It'll look a bit crude, but... Fjolt spat. I am from the west. I was born and raised on Salket. We build with stone there. We are civilized. He was the oldest of the group, a grizzled graybeard of 50 or so. Slovatsky chuckled. Not your west, ours. But it sounds like a lot of work, Lou. It will be. But it should give us some defense. If the colony grows a lot, we won't be able to put all the houses inside, of course. But it still makes sense to have some sort of fortification to retreat to, if necessary. We may not need it, but... Chak nodded. Karl's plan should keep us relatively safe, as long as he doesn't spend too much time here. But you're right, Richetti. No sense in taking a chance for no payoff. Ahira cocked his head to one side. That's easy for you to say. You're going on this first expedition with Karl. Little of the sweat will be from your brow. Not more than a 10 days' worth at best. Damn, but I like your positive attitude, Ahira. The little man smiled, pointing out another nice part of Richetti's plan. Richetti spread his hands. That's the broad outline. If we do it this way, I'll mark out the boundaries in the morning, and we can get right to work. Should be able to have 3 walls of the palisade up within a... Palisade? The outer wall. We'll put a walkway around the inside, around the top. As I was saying, it should be done within 2, maybe 3 10 days. Ahira, you're still the leader. It's up to you. And if you don't want to do it my way, I'd like to hear what idiocy you have in mind. Andrea raised an eyebrow. Why just 3/4 of the wall? It seems to me it'd be more efficient to do the whole thing at one time. No. The gate will be the hard part. By leaving that wall for last, we can have a way of bringing wood in to build the houses and such. We could do the houses first, but I think we'll save some effort by using the palisade as the 4th wall for some of them, and for the grain mill when we build it. Besides, we'll want to set up a smithy and make some nails before we do the houses. We can build the palisade walls with just wood and leather. And sweat, of course. He turned to Ahira. That's my proposal. There'll be lots of details to work out, but it seems to me this is the best way. Any objections? The dwarf waited silently for a moment. We'll do it. Lou, you're in charge of construction. Complete charge. You don't ask anyone, you tell them, unless you think you need another opinion. Refer any discipline problems to me. He tapped his thumb against the blade of his battle-axe. Cullinane snorted. That include you? Lou, if I give you any trouble, you can refer it to Karl.
Or me.
Or Elagon. The dwarf turned to Slovatsky. Now, Walter, what are your thoughts about crops and animals? Richetti sat down, barely listening as Slovatsky stood and began to talk about slash-and-burn agriculture and where he wanted to put the first field. For more than 4 years, Lou Richetti had been an engineering student in a world that didn't really want things built. The days of great construction had passed from his world. The future of engineering was with piddling little electronic circuits, not big structures, not great things. there would be no more Brooklyn bridges built, no more Hoover dams. But here, it was different. A world to conquer. He smiled.
I'm going to be building things,
he thought, his heart beating audibly in his chest.
It's a small start, but it's a start.
He shook his head. This was ridiculous. Getting all excited about putting together a bunch of log cabins and some stockade fencing? And some sort of smithy, come to think of it. That would have to be done early. The flatbed contained 50 or so pounds of thin nail stock, but no nails. Then again, nail-making shouldn't require a full-fledged smithy. A hot fire, a bellows, a hammer, and the smallest of the anvils would do. And ridiculous. It had to be done, granted, but getting excited about it?
I disagree.
Elegon lifted his head from his crossed forelegs, curling and uncurling his wings.
It is not ridiculous, friend Lewis. Not if it makes you feel this good. Build and enjoy.
The first wall went up much more quickly than Karl would have believed possible. It wasn't just because of the wood knife's ability to turn the felling, stripping, and shaping of a tall pine from a tedious affair into something that took only minutes, helpful as that was. And it wasn't just Elegon's great strength, although that certainly helped too. Elegon would seize the blunt end of a stripped log in his massive jaws, and drag it from where it fell to where the empty post hole was. That made harnessing the horses unnecessary, although Ricchetti could and did rig a block, tackle, and 20-foot-tall tripod. With that, and with the aid of the mules and the cannibalized harnesses from the flatbed, Karl, Walter, and Ahira could raise the upper end of a log into its proper position and lower the flat end into its hole, before packing dirt around the now upright log to keep it steady. And it wasn't just that all of them worked hard, although they certainly did. Elegon hauled logs, beginning work when the sky grew light, not quitting until well after dark. Fiolt, Kira, and Chalk took turns with the wood knife, felling and stripping pines, keeping a constant supply of 20-foot posts coming, as well as stacking the scraps for the cooking fires. Karl, Walter, and Ahira dug the holes and raised the posts. Andy and Ea kept bowls of hot stew and pitchers of cold water coming from dawn to dusk. Eric and Tennedy hunted deer, duck, and rabbit, gathered wild garlic, onions, chot, burdock, mike, and taktob for the stew pot, stretching the supply of dried beef and putting off the time when it would become necessary to start converting the chickens from egg layers into roasters. What really made it all work was Ricchetti. Lou always seemed to be at Karl's elbow, any time he needed a bit of advice or instruction. At times he wondered if there weren't really 3 or 4 Lou Ricchettis. Others reported the same. Ricchetti was the one who knew how to lash together a tripod of logs, and throw together a wooden block and tackle, to raise and support a pole, or turn a dozen saplings and a few hundred yards of rope into a double-lock bridge across the deep-bedded stream. He was the one who withheld a portion of the scrap wood, for Elegon to roast slowly into wood tar, to be later distilled down to creosote, which would protect the palisade against insects and rot. Ricchetti showed them how to lash the poles together at the top of the wall with wet leather strips, so that as the leather dried, it shrank and linked the individual poles together solidly. More important, he knew how to apportion the work so that no bottlenecks developed. Karl, Walter, and Ahira always had just enough poles to work with, without worrying about falling behind while unused ones accumulated, or letting valuable time go by while they waited for the next. Ricchetti was, finally, in his own proper environment. Karl smiled at the little swagger his walk had developed. The sounds and smells of the dying were far away. The days passed quickly, filled with the sweet smell and unwashable stickiness of the freshly cut pine, the stink of his own sweat, and the deep sleep brought on by hard labor.
That brings us to the end of Chapter 6. While these are not the most action-packed chapters, I enjoy them nonetheless. We meet new members of the party in the freed slaves. We see Ricchetti come into his own as an engineer. We get a much-needed break between all the blood, horror, and death that has marked the group's time in this fantasy world made real. There is something seductive, I think, about building and living in an untouched wilderness. For all the dangers and problems such a life can lead to, it is ultimately free. I'll be back next week with another installment. If you enjoyed this part, please like the video and consider subscribing to my channel. The more people who do so, the more the algorithm will recommend my readings for others. Thank you for listening, and good night.